Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition. And folks, employers are doing everything they can to bring workers back, and they are offering higher and higher wages. Welcome to this channel, Ignition Time, everyone. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda with Ignition Time, and on this channel, I cover important matters pertaining to the country, the economy, as well as our money. When you get a chance, please click the like button, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. That would be greatly appreciated. I don't ask for anything in return. That's all I ask for, and that is your support. Here's the headline of an article on your screen from Bloomberg. US employment costs rise at a record pace as wages surge. In fact, wages and salaries have risen 1.5% for our fellow Americans. This is an all-time high, and companies are actually raising pay to attract workers in what is a very tight market. So what is actually going on, folks? Employment costs for American companies rose at the fastest pace on record in the third quarter as companies across a variety of sectors, I'm talking travel, leisure, entertainment, hospitality, retail, manufacturing. So across a variety of sectors, companies raised wages because there were labor shortages. So what's going on? The employment cost index, which by the way provides us with a general idea of wages and benefits, rose 1.3% from the prior quarter, according to data from the Labor Department. So let's show you this image on your screen, which shows you pay increases. Now, this data is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's from a Bloomberg article. We'll provide you with a link to this article in the description section below. You'll see that there was a record jump in terms of wages and salaries. They jumped by a significant margin. This was a record in the last quarter. And so basically what this means, and that's the employment cost index lower down in the graph over there. What this means is companies are paying more. In other words, there were gains in compensation for employees. Employees are able to make more money. Now, I do want to be as clear as I can that this is not, this is not really a kumbaya moment for all of us, because things are starting to cost more. Inflation is kicking in. I'm paying more at the gas pump. I'm paying more for milk, eggs. You know how it is. I know how it is. But at the end of the day, if inflation cools down, and by the way, Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, did say that she expected inflation to cool down in the second half of 2022. If that does indeed happen, and I'm not a fortune teller, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that the odds are high that that will happen, because what we are seeing right now is essentially a transition from a post-pandemic economy into our normal healthy economy. We are not there yet. We're not there yet, which is why we're seeing these, I guess I can call them growing pains, because we're growing back into our normal American economy, growing pains like labor shortages, supply chain shortages, chip shortages, which actually impacted Apple's revenue. And we're starting to see a return to a pre-pandemic lifestyle. I do believe it'll take us about 6 months to get there. And I do believe at that point, prices will indeed start to normalize. So what I'm trying to say is, if inflation does indeed come back under control, like the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, and wages continue to remain high, which they will, it's not like your employer will say, hey, I was paying you more and I'm going to pay you less. That's not the way things work. Then hopefully, some of the profit margins of companies can essentially move over to employees, and employees will then have the opportunity to save more, build more of a nest egg, and finally live the American dream. So compensation gains were broad-based across many sectors, and this is in large part due to a tight labor market that's actually putting pressure on a lot of employers to actually raise wages. Wages and salaries for Americans rose at a record pace. They actually increased by 1.5% in the last quarter. Now, unlike the average hourly earnings figures in the monthly jobs report that came out in September, the ECI is not impacted by employment shifts across industries and occupations. Now, this means that it's a reliable indicator of what is happening in the economy. So let's take a look at the wage breakdown by private industries. In credit intermediation services, the wages increased by 7.7%. Finance and insurance up by 3%, leisure and hospitality up by 2.6%, nursing and care facilities up by 2.1%, service providing industries up by 1.7%. And folks, what's ironic in this economy is while millions of Americans remain out of work, businesses are actually struggling to hire and retain enough workers to actually keep up with all of this demand. Now, as a result, many companies have actually increased wages, offered one-time bonuses, or offered other perks and incentives like flexible schedules to attract workers. I have done other videos talking about this. Americans do not want to go back to work until they can get a job that pays them a fair wage, which absolutely makes sense, until they can get a job where they have a flexible schedule, until they can get a job where they are respected, where there is dignity of labor. And why not? Why should we accept dead end jobs? Why should we accept jobs that we are not happy with, where we are paid minimum wage, where we are treated like we are less than human beings? So, this whole pandemic has provided millions of our fellow Americans the opportunity to reevaluate our priorities and to look back at the bigger picture and say, hey, I don't want to go back to the same job. I'm going to change my skills. I'm going to improve my skills so I can get a better job. I might even start my own business, and this is phenomenal. I believe that this has also been a wake-up call for employers, where employers can now reevaluate themselves and say, oops, we pay too little. We have a bad work culture. We have very fixed, very rigorous schedules. We treat our employees like machines, and we need to do a better job by improving our culture. And by the way, speaking of culture, this nonsense about Facebook changing their name to Meta was actually pretty bizarre, and I think this is an effort by Facebook to actually reinvigorate their own culture. And I just think that it's a company that I don't personally support. I haven't invested in Facebook. I don't care to. I don't even use Facebook that much because I don't like what they stand for. As you can see, I'm a big fan of Google because YouTube is owned by Google, and I am a big fan of companies like Google and Apple. In fact, my biggest stock holding is indeed Apple. But I digress. I apologize. Let me get back to the actual content. Wages and salaries at companies rose an average of 1.6% in the quarter, and incentives played a key role. Up from a year ago, total compensation rose 4.6%. So what's the bottom line, folks? More and more companies are trying to offer more money. We're talking about companies like Chipotle Mexican Grill and Tesla. They've raised prices on their consumers. They've raised prices on their customers to help offset all these increased labor costs. And this is actually creating concerns that these rapid wage increases could lead to a wage-driven inflationary spiral. What that means is, if you get paid more money as an employer, what's your company going to do? Your company is going to raise prices for their customers. Now, another argument to this is, hey, wages have not increased in many, many, many years. So, hey, it's about time that these wages increased, because rising productivity, essentially employees over a period of time get more productive because they become better at what they do. They become more experienced at what they do. The rising productivity should help to absorb some of those pressures from wage increases. Now, this is interesting. Wage growth is expected to slow down as more people return to the workforce, according to Ian Shepherdson, who's the chief economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. However, if that doesn't happen, asset prices could come under severe pressure, and the Federal Reserve could be forced to raise interest rates sooner than expected. This is more of a macro picture, which basically means that at some point, the Federal Reserve will need to increase interest rates in order to be able to normalize the economy. Shepherdson said this in a note. Transitory would have to be abandoned, and the Fed would have no choice but to start hiking as soon as June. To be clear, that's not our base case, but the risks are high and rising. So, what do companies think about this entire situation? According to Kimberly-Clark Corp CEO Michael Su, he said this on an October 25th earnings call. It doesn't feel like that there's more options for hourly employment, and because of that, that's putting pressure on the labor markets and hiring for the roles that we need. Tesla CFO Zachary Kirkhorn said this in their earnings call. While we are seeing an impact from the rising commodity and labor costs, we also have been adjusting pricing, which should help to compensate. In other words, he's saying, hey, we're going to raise prices on our customers because we're having to pay more to our employees. IBM CFO James Kavanaugh said this in an earnings call. With a competitive labor market, this is putting some pressure on our labor cost, including higher acquisition and retention costs. In other words, he's saying, hey, it's becoming harder to find and keep good employees, which is not yet reflected in our current pricing. We expect to capture this value in future engagements, but it will take time to appear in our margin profile. That's basically a fancy way of saying, hey, we're going to raise prices on our customers because our costs are going up. And Sherwin-Williams CEO John Marcus said this in an earnings call. We have had to make some wage rate adjustments in some of our factories, distribution centers, and fleet drivers to, I'd say, attract and retain some of our employees. So you can start to see, folks, this is very clear that a lot of CEOs are planning on finding ways to make up for the increased costs associated in hiring and retaining employees. And this is the evolution of the American economy. Folks, I've been working consistently for a long time now to provide you with significant value and to provide you with the truth wherever the truth might lead us. Please click like, please subscribe, and please enable notifications. Also follow me on Twitter. This right here is my Twitter feed. You'll be able to keep up with all the latest news stories on Twitter, and you'll be able to follow along the news with me. My Twitter handle is ignition_time. That's ignition_time. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.